and the rights of all Syrians upheld. The violence in Sawada must be investigated and those responsible held accountable. We want humanitarian access to be restored, aid delivered, and Syria's sovereignty must be respected. The UK can be proud of our support to the Syrian people over many, many years. And a stable Syria matters to the UK's national interests for terrorism, for irregular migration, for regional stability. We must work to prevent extremism, sectarianism, or lawlessness taking hold now that Assad is gone. That's why we're backing a sustainable ceasefire, and that is why we support an inclusive transition, and it's why I visited Damascus recently to support and to press the new government to meet its commitments. I'll now turn to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. It's 2.5 months since Prime Minister Netanyahu restarted offensive operations. The IDF has driven Palestinians out of 86% of Gaza, leaving around 2 million people trapped in an area scarcely over 20 square miles. Whatever this Israeli government might claim, repeated displacement of so many civilians is not keeping them safe. In fact, it's quite the reverse. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the new Israeli aid system is inhumane, it's dangerous, and it deprives Gazans of human dignity. It contradicts long-established humanitarian principles. It creates disorder Hamas is now exploiting, with distribution points reduced from 400 to just 4. It forces desperate civilians, children among them, to scramble unsafely for the essentials of life. It's a grotesque spectacle, wrecking a terrible human cost. Almost 1,000 civilians have been killed since May, seeking aid, including 100, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this weekend alone. There are near daily reports of Israeli troops opening fire on people to access food. Israeli jets have hit women and children waiting for a health clinic to open. An Israeli drone has struck down children filling water containers, which Israeli officials blamed on a technical error. Hamas is, of course, contributing to the chaos and taking advantage of it. But I utterly condemn the killing of civilians seeking to meet their basic needs. The Israeli government must answer what possible military justification can there be for strikes that have killed desperate, starving children? What immediate actions are they taking to stop this litany of horrors? And what will they do to hold those responsible to account? Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've said before, I'm a steadfast supporter of Israel's security and its right to exist. I treasure the many connections between our peoples, and the horrors of October the 7th must never be forgotten. But I firmly believe the Israeli government's action are doing untold damage to Israel's standing in the world and undermining Israel's long-term security. Netanyahu should listen to the Israeli people, 82% of whom desperately want a ceasefire, and to the hostage families, because they know it offers the best chance to bring their loved ones home. Those hostages may be hidden in cramped tunnels under the ruins of Gaza, but we will not forget them or Hamas's despicable actions, and we will continue to demand their unconditional release. This offensive puts them in grave danger, but still Netanyahu persists. Indeed, Minister Katz has gone further, proposing to drive Gaza's entire population into Rafah, imprisoning Palestinians unless persuaded to emigrate. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a cruel vision which must never come to pass, and I condemn it unequivocally. Permanent forced displacement is a violation of international humanitarian law. Many Israelis themselves are appalled. A former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, said it marches us into an abyss. He was right. Mr. Speaker, today I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now. There is no military solution. Negotiations will secure the hostages. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. Hamas and Israel must both commit to a ceasefire now, and the next ceasefire must be the last ceasefire. I thank the United States, Qatar and Egypt for their tireless efforts, and I'm sure all members share my intense frustration that it has not happened. Until there is a breakthrough, we must keep doing all we can to relieve the suffering. UK aid has saved lives, reaching hundreds of thousands with food, water, hygiene and sanitation, and essential health care, and under the most appalling circumstances, our aid is saving lives today. That includes the almost £9 million the UK has provided to UK Med since we entered office, reaching 500,000 patients inside Gaza, 24,000 in the past fortnight alone. Like 3-year-old Razan, UK-funded medics removed a bullet from her neck after nearly 3 hours of surgery. These doctors and nurses working in the most extreme conditions are true heroes. They deserve the thanks and the admiration of the entire House. We're also working, of course, multilaterally. The 149 trucks from the World Food Programme and UNICEF entering Gaza in recent days included food supplies funded by the United Kingdom, and 1,000 more trucks laden with aid paid for by British taxpayers can enter the moment the Israeli government lets them in. Today, I'm announcing an extra £40 million worth for humanitarian assistance in Gaza this year, including £7.5 million for UK Med to sustain their vital operations in Gaza and save more lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, accompanying the horrors in Gaza, there is an accelerating campaign to prevent a further Palestinian state in the West Bank. It's embraced by Netanyahu. It's encouraged by his ministers. It's driven by an extremist ideology which wants to suffocate the two-state solution, the only route to a lasting peace and security. We see it in the unprecedented pace of settlement expansion, in the shocking levels of settler violence, even settler terrorism. For that is what the most egregious ideological attacks are, and it is the deliberate attempts to squeeze the Palestinian Authority, unjustly denying it access to its own funds, and it harms Israel's long-term interests in the process. Now the Israeli government is reintroducing plans to construct new units in the E1 area of occupied East Jerusalem. If built, this settlement would separate the West Bank north from its south, and Palestinians in the West Bank from East Jerusalem. These plans are wholly unacceptable, they are illegal, and they must not happen. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are striving to keep open the prospects of a two-state solution. UK assistance has been preserving the Palestinian Authority, contributing to essential Palestinian workers' salaries and supporting them to progress critical reforms. Today I can confirm we are enhancing our support, providing £7 million to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian governance, implementing the agreement signed by myself and PM Mustafa earlier this year, and we're delivering the reform plans that President Abbas has set out. I can also confirm that we're providing £20 million worth to support UNRWA's many services for Palestinian refugees. And alongside this support, we are leading diplomatic efforts to show that there must be a viable pathway to a Palestinian state involving the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, in the security and governance of the area. Hamas can have no role in the governance of Gaza, nor use it as a launchpad for terrorism. Israeli ministers should support the Palestinian Authority, not actively undermine its economy, as Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smodrich are doing. The UK is co-leading with Egypt the humanitarian and reconstruction track for the forthcoming two-state solution conference, and we are pushing to agree plans for a credible next phase in Gaza with a responsible reform PA at their core. So we turn any temporary ceasefire into a lasting peace. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in our year in office, this Labour government has acted to address this horrendous conflict. We've restored funding to UNRWA after the Tories froze it. We suspended arms export licences when the Tories declined to act. We've provided nearly £250 million in humanitarian assistance this year and next, getting medical treatment and food to hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza. We stood with the hostage families at every stage. We've worked with Jordan to fly medicines into Gaza, with Egypt to treat medically evacuated civilians, with Kuwait and UNICEF to help children in Gaza. We've delivered 3 sanctions packages on violent settlers, suspended trade negotiations with the Israeli government, and sanctioned far-right Israeli ministers for incitement. We've defended the independence of the international courts. We've signed a landmark agreement with the Palestinian Authority and hosted the Palestinian Prime Minister in London, pushing for the reform it needs. We called for, worked for, voted for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages at every possible opportunity, and we will keep doing so until this war is over. Hamas releases the hostages and we finally have a pathway to a 2-state solution. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The violence, loss of life and conflicts that continue in the Middle East shock us all. The events in the Middle East have a direct impact upon our national interests and to people living in our own country, from the concerns about family members in the regions to demonstrations on our street, and from the threats from Iran to the rise of anti-Semitism. This side of the House is clear that we want to see an end of the conflict in Gaza, a return of the hostages. Humanitarian support, which is so desperately needed, must get in, and an end to the terror inflicted by Hamas and Iran. But the reality of peace and a sustainable end to the conflict in Gaza seems to be drifting further away. What is Britain's role when it comes to workable outcomes and practical solutions to advance an end to this conflict? And what diplomatic action is being taken with regional allies and the US? Where is Britain's voice and action when it comes to putting new pressure on Hamas to agree the most recent US proposals to secure a ceasefire and release the hostages who've been in cruel captivity for more than 650 days? On the statement the Foreign Secretary signed earlier today, can he confirm or explain what an unconditional and permanent ceasefire means for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority? Last week I met with Keith and Ava Siegel, hearing their harrowing experience of being held in brutal captivity by Hamas. I paid tribute to their incredible bravery and their resilience and dedication to securing the freedom of the remaining hostages, from Gail to Ziv Berman to Matan Angras and Omi Moran, and all those being held in barbaric captivity. They must be returned to their loved ones. The hostages are denied humanitarian access by Hamas. What is the government doing about this? And when was his last intervention on this particular issue? On aid to Gaza, this situation has deteriorated beyond all rational comprehension. The daily reports of casualties seeking aid are appalling, and we utterly condemn these attacks. But our words and political statements of condemnation are not saving lives. So what practical solutions, proposals and options has the Foreign Secretary and the British government discussed with Israel on aid supplies into Gaza? What dialogue is there to find an agreement on getting aid supplies and access open that goes beyond the current dangerous approach that has been adopted? I remind the House that the last Conservative government, through Lord Cameron, secured new aid routes and better aid access to save lives. Surely, in light of the desperate urgency of the situation we all see, calls for such options have to be considered once again. On settlement, I reiterate our long-standing position that these are not helpful to achieving long-term peace. Israel should not take steps that could make a 2-state solution more difficult, and it must use its legal system to clamp down on settler violence. We want a 2-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both Israeli and Palestinians, and Palestinians, and I'm sure that he agrees it should only come at a time that is conducive to peace, and that it cannot be at the start of a process, and certainly not while Israeli hostages are still in captivity in Gaza. And does the Foreign Secretary agree that there needs to be a clear plan and international measures to see the exit of Hamas from Gaza? On Syria, the barbaric violence we have witnessed in recent days cannot continue. All groups and minorities in Syria must be protected, and the Foreign Secretary has mentioned his recent discussions with the transitional Syrian leadership. Did he convey to those in charge that they have a responsibility to end the armed conflict in their country and guarantee the protection of all minority groups in Syria before international community removes sanctions and normalises diplomatic relationships? What assurances has he received from the transitional government? And have these commitments been met in any way with measurable action? Will he update the House on whether any of the £64.5 million of money dedicated to Syria announced by the government earlier this month will be used to deal with the aftermath of these latest clashes, and how will it be spent? Can the Foreign Secretary also confirm whether he deems sufficient action has been taken by the interim government on the destruction of chemical weapons in Syria? Does he believe the HTS government is capable of securing Syria's borders? And can he also explain whether he intends to change the prescribed status of HTS? On sanctions, can he give us his assessment on the effect of the sanctions already lifted, and if they have had any unintended side effects? Syria's future still hangs in the balance, and we need to be wholly evidence-led on our approach. The Foreign Secretary did not mention Iran, but we understand from reports that Iran, Britain, France and Germany are due to hold nuclear talks in Istanbul on Friday. Can he confirm the purpose of these talks? Is he coordinating actions with the United States? And what is the content of the deal the Foreign Secretary would like to see going forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the tone of her remark and the cross-party consensus that exists in this House that this war must come to an end, and the huge concern that we all have, not just in this House, but also in the international community, about the humanitarian suffering that we continue to see. And just on that point, she raises what more can be done and praise and aid the work of the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron. She will recognise that Lord Cameron and, prior to that, former Foreign Secretary Cleverly, all raised with the Israelis the situation, the humanitarian situation. It has got steadily worse. It's now down to 4 aid points, and this new foundation offering aid, but people dying as they scramble for that aid. I note in her remarks she did not say that we should go back to the 400 aid points that we had in the past, and she will note that her government did not refund funding to UNRWA. But we believe the UN and its system are best placed to deliver aid to Gaza, and that is the position that we continue to maintain. She raises also, against that backdrop, what we are doing in terms of our multilateral and doing to work with others to bring this to an end. Can I ask her to read the statement that landed? 31 countries have now signed up to that statement, and of course we are pressing and working with colleagues. That's why I spoke to Minister Saar once again today, to urge him to do the right thing, to get a ceasefire, but to look now clearly at this aid system that's not working. And then on governance, she will know that we will participate in the two-state conference that's been organised by France in a couple of weeks' time, and she will know that that conference is now dedicated to looking closely at the governance arrangements that you've got to put in place. When Hamas leave, and they must go and they can't govern Gaza, how do we ensure that this is not a 60-day pause, but we bring an end to this and we move to the two-state solution? And she knows our commitment to recognition as set out in our manifesto, and the conversation that's going on internationally in relation to recognition. She rightly presses the case on Syria. And of course, when I met with al-Shara, I was absolutely clear that this government had to be inclusive. I pressed him on his former background as a terrorist and our concerns, the concerns that will exist in this chamber, but we must work with him to ensure that it's inclusive, to ensure that security is fundamental, and she'll understand we have much that we need to do to support them on counter-terrorism at this time. And in a country where 90% of people are living in poverty, to ensure that people get the aid and the support they need, and indeed the areas affected by the murders that we saw over the last few days.
Chair the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Deputy Speaker. Earlier today, then, 31 countries put out a powerful message. The war must end now. There must be aid going into Gaza, unrestricted. The hostages must be released, and all parties must uphold international law. It was sent to Israel, and by return, this powerful message was rejected. It was denounced by Israel as disconnected from reality.
Shocking.
So what now? So what now? In that statement, the 31 nations said we are prepared to take further action to support an immediate ceasefire and political pathways to security and peace for Israel, Palestine and the entire region. So what are we going to do, may I ask? Does that include the final recognition of Palestine?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady is right to call into question so quickly the Israeli government rejecting the advice of its friends and 31 countries coming together, horrified by those who are losing their life simply reaching out to get aid and humanitarian care. She, of course, references the debate that exists in relation to recognition. Let me tell her that we will be working with our French colleagues who are focusing the upcoming conference particularly on two states and how we get to two states. And as you would expect, the UK will play its part. On the broader issues, I hope and pray that we get a ceasefire, and of course that will lead to further activity as we head towards UNGA.
Liberal Democrat front bench spokesman Callum Mann.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. I welcome his commitment to a diplomatic resolution in Syria and to holding the governments of Syria and Israel accountable for protecting all civilians and especially minorities. The Foreign Secretary is right to say that the situation in Gaza is inhumane and grotesque, and he is right that a ceasefire is desperately needed. I welcome the aid allocations that he has announced. But the problem is that the situation is not new. And the problem is that repeated expressions of regret by this government have not prevented further carnage being wrought by the Netanyahu government. The whole House saw the passion with which the Right Honourable Gentleman announced the British, French and Canadian joint position on the 20th of May, and with which the Minister for the Middle East sanctioned Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir on the 10th of June. In those statements, ministers said that, and I quote, "we cannot stand by," and that they would respond, quote, "not just with words, but with actions." I think they meant it. And yet, 2 months later, the Secretary of State has only words, not actions. His joint statement with other countries today says once again only, quote, "we are prepared to take further action." And yet, children queuing for food or water are still being killed every single day as the Israeli cabinet maintains its grotesque blockade of humanitarian aid and now proposes an open-air prison for all Gazans, which, according to Ehud Olmert, would amount to ethnic cleansing. And yet I spoke today to the Oxfordshire doctors, Nick Maynard and Nada Al-Hadithi from Nasser Hospital in Gaza. They described the desperation of civilians facing the latest Israeli attack on Deir al-Balah, the deaths of patients for want of basic dressings, and that IDF snipers fired directly into the hospital compound. And yet, settlers in the West Bank continue illegally to occupy Palestinian homes and land. And yet, the remaining hostages held in Gaza now for over 650 days at the hands of Hamas terrorists are no closer to release. I've written to the Foreign Secretary frequently to set out the many more steps Liberal Democrats believe he should take. So I will simply ask, does the Foreign Secretary truly believe that his government is doing all it can to put an end to the terrible violence and starvation being visited in Gaza in clear contravention of international law? Can he explain why there have been so few consequences since he and the minister spoke so powerfully in the last 2 months? And can he dispel the widespread view that he is not setting the policy he would choose, but that he is instead being reined in by Number 10's desire not to upset President Trump by acting more boldly?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that I would actually want to associate my remarks with much that he said. It is a source of great regret to me that we have not brought this most horrendous of wars and conflict to an end. The Right Honourable Lady who chairs the Select Committee raised the response I had not heard, whilst I have been sat in this chamber, the response of the Israeli government to the statement signed by 31. That ignoring of the international community is tarnishing greatly the reputation of Israel. I listed in my speech the action that this government has taken since coming to office in the last year. He knows that this government has led much of the multilateral effort, and that sits behind both the statement of the leaders a few weeks ago and the statement of foreign secretaries today. We will continue to press. We continue, of course, to look at what further we may need to do, as he would expect. But let me tell him that I wish I could say too that were we to recognise tomorrow it would bring this war to an end. I'm afraid I'm not sure that is the case. What is required now is painstaking diplomacy to get to that ceasefire, and my assessment is we will not see that ceasefire until the Knesset rises.
Order. Order. Once again, we have a very large number of honourable members who wish to take part in this discussion. And the intention is to try to accommodate everybody, but that will mean members exercising a degree of self-restraint that was not entirely evident in the previous session. I leave it to you, but if you want everybody to be called, then please, questions, not statements, and if I may say so, Foreign Secretary, relatively brief answers. Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Sorry, I missed that. I mean, this statement we have from the 25 or 31 partners, it takes us no further forward. So we're prepared to take further action to support an immediate ceasefire. It's action that people are wanting, not more repetition of we call for, we demand, we urge. We want action, and this isn't action. We've had this so many times before. We've got this terrible humanitarian crisis, forcible transfer of civilians, the starvation by Israel, replacing. How can it be that we have a situation where IDF are firing at children, systematically going for head, stomach and testicles before their sport, and we have Rafah razed to the ground and this euphemistic humanitarian city being constructed, which the former Prime Minister of Israel called a concentration camp? When are we going to take the appropriate action to bring about comprehensive and full trade and arms embargo and concentrate the mind of Israel? Because nothing else is working. They're not listening. They're getting away with murder every single day.
The honourable gentleman clearly didn't listen to a word that I said, but I'm sure that the Foreign Secretary did.
I understand my honourable friend's frustration, and he has been consistent with that for a very long time. And as I've said, I regret that we are not at a place where we currently have a ceasefire, despite the international community that, calling for one and the pressure that exists. And he's right. What we are seeing at the moment is an abomination, and I would join him with those remarks.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Of course, we all condemn the evil Hamas, but is not Prime Minister Netanyahu the biggest recruiting sergeant for Hamas? For every fighter he kills, he's radicalising the whole world against the state of Israel because of this appalling humanitarian solution. Now, I agree with everything the Foreign Secretary says, but I think we say to him that our word's enough. I just wonder whether he will oblige the House of Commons now and have a free vote, and I bet this will pass, this motion will pass by an enormous majority in the House of Commons for further actions against the extreme right-wing actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu, sanctions and recognising the state of Palestine.
Well, I hope that the Israeli government is watching and notes what senior parliamentarians are saying on both sides of this House, and he will know that 83% of the population now want a ceasefire, and he will have seen the remarks of former prime ministers and all of the opposition in Israel who condemned the most recent proposals suggested by Minister Katz.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Earlier this month, I hosted in Parliament Dr Wasim Saeed, who's a British surgeon who'd returned from Gaza working in the Nasser hospital, where he treated children for severe burns, amputations and shrapnel wounds that were crawling with maggots. He showed us videos which would shock everybody in this House. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Israel should face a reckoning in the courts for such injuries and deaths, and that the UK should force such a reckoning? And more importantly, does he agree that recognising a state of Palestine is really about recognising the humanity of the Palestinian people, and that their children deserve to have an equal worth of every child on this planet?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that the Palestinian cause is a just cause. And I would ask the Israeli government to reflect again on international humanitarian law. I've got in front of me the practitioner's legal handbook, and I'm hugely concerned that there feel to be breaches as I read through it.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The deaths of those trying to access aid in Gaza is truly shocking. However, the Foreign Secretary will be aware that the number of civilians killed is being disputed by Israel, and there are suggestions of disinformation. Does he agree that one way in which we could establish what is actually happening is that the international media organisations like the BBC and Reuters were allowed full access into Gaza?
Yes, 100%.
Uma Kumaran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Each time members come together for a statement on the Middle East, there's a new horror to comment on, a new inhumanity unfolding, a new form of strong words from the dispatch box. Last week, IDF shells hit a church sheltering 600 civilians. Several people were killed. The Pope called it barbarity. Yesterday, a World Food Programme convoy came under fire from Israeli forces, despite numerous assurances that humanitarian operational conditions would improve. Innocent Palestinians who were queuing for desperately needed food were killed. According to MSF, we're witnessing in real time the creation of conditions for the eradication of Palestinian lives in Gaza. So I asked the Foreign Secretary, where is this government's red line? At what point does our basic humanity require us to take stronger action? Many of us in this House think the red line was passed a long time ago.
Well, can I remind my honourable friend of the action that this government have taken and how we have tried to lead in the international community on this issue. But can I also join her in condemning what we've seen in relation to civilians? Page 28 of the Practitioner's Handbook on Conflict, Hunger and International Humanitarian Law makes it clear that parties to armed conflict must take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare the civilian population, civilians and civilian objects. Clearly, that is not happening.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like others in this House, I'm frankly astonished at the statement of the Foreign Secretary. At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on. He himself said there's a massive prison camp being constructed in the south of Gaza. He knows that leading genocide scholars from across the world now are ringing the alarm bells, and yet he has the temerity to show up to this House and wave his chequebook as if it's going to salve his conscience. Can he not see that his inaction and, frankly, cowardice is making this country irrelevant? Can he also not see the personal risk to him, given our international obligations, that he may end up at The Hague because of his inaction? And finally, really frankly, an appeal to the Labour backbenchers. We can't get your leadership to change their minds. Only you can, if you organise and insist on change.
Before I bring in the Foreign Secretary, can I just remind members that we have got other business to proceed to tonight. So please keep questions and answers short. Foreign Secretary.
I understand the fury that the right honourable gentleman feels, but I have to tell him I have to tell him that it demeans his argument when he personalises it in the way that he does, and it is not, and it's unbecoming and not something that the House expects, particularly of more senior members.
Alex Ballinger.
Deputy Speaker, we've seen again images of children dying of starvation and malnutrition, and this comes after months of warnings by the UN system about the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's announcement of more aid, but we know the GHF will not allow more UK aid in. He said to me 10 days ago at the Foreign Affairs Committee that if there was not a ceasefire, he would consider further action against Israel. As we've seen the Israelis respond to calls for a ceasefire by launching a new offensive in Deir el-Balah, what further actions will we take to try and end this catastrophic situation?
Can I just say to my honourable friend that we have actually been able to get some further aid in with the World Food Programme, and of course that's important. And it is also right to say that with our funding of UK Med, we have been able to save lives. And of course we must endeavour every single day to make the humanitarian situation better.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary appeared before the Foreign Affairs Committee on the 8th of July and was asked what would happen if we do not see a ceasefire in Gaza in the coming weeks. He was further asked whether the British government would take further measures against Israel. The Foreign Secretary was pensive and said yes. The British government would be taking further measures if the abomination in Gaza continued. Can you tell the House what those further measures are, or at the very least, when we might see them?
Yeah.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, we are doing everything we can, supporting our Qatari, Egyptian and US friends to get a ceasefire, and he will understand that in looking closely at these issues, even if we are contemplating further measures, they work more effectively if you can coordinate allies.
Mr Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ground invasion of Deir el-Balah is the latest to add to the daily attacks of Gazans and further evidence that the conflict has gone too far. The Israeli foreign ministers have already rejected the joint statement signed by 31 countries, including our governments. Can the Foreign Secretary outline what additional specific steps he will take with others to bring about a ceasefire and secure aid to starving Gazans?
Well, can I say to honourable friend, I set out in my speech the action that this government has taken, and I stand by it. I regret that we have not brought a ceasefire. I have set out also the more aid that we are attempting to get in and how we're supporting the Palestinian people, including the Palestinian Authority, and I stand by that.
Stephen Flynn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Foreign Secretary's watching in his statement today, he has refused to call it a genocide. He's refused to end all arms sales to Israel, and of course he continues to refuse to recognise the state of Palestine. So here's something he could do. On his watch, just 2 wee kids who've been bombed or shot by the Israeli forces have been evacuated to the UK for medical treatment. Now, the First Minister of Scotland wrote to the Prime Minister saying that we stand ready to provide hospital treatment to those children. Shamefully, the Prime Minister hasn't even bothered to respond. So will he do what his boss won't and commit the UK to making sure that children who've been bombed by Israel are treated?
Order, Foreign Secretary.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have suspended arms sales that could be used in Gaza? And he should look closely at our export licensing regime, because much of it is not about arms. It's about, for example, equipment that we send to support NGOs and others who are in the area. And of course, I'm happy to look with the Home Secretary at what more we can do for children who are suffering.
Tan Singh Sitty.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers say it's for the courts to decide whether genocide has occurred in Gaza, but the Genocide Convention is aimed primarily at prevention. And the ICJ has already found that there is a plausible risk of genocide and advised that all states must act collectively to prevent it. while the occupying Israeli forces are accelerating the building of illegal settlements in the West Bank, the scenes in Gaza are horrific, with almost 1,000 people being killed by the IDF just while seeking aid. We're seeing the starvation being used as a weapon, forced displacement of Gazans, the mass civilian deaths, and senior Israeli officials are using dehumanizing language while proposing to concentrate Gazans into a mass detention camp. So, Foreign Secretary, when will the government take decisive action with international partners to prevent genocide?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and he prays and aid the law in terms of plausibility in breach of international humanitarian law, if he looks at my statement back in September, I assessed that there was a clear risk of breaching international humanitarian law, and it's for that reason that I suspended arms sales.
I am aiming to finish this statement around 7:45, so people will be able to see. I don't think I'll be able to get everybody in with the length of questions. David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I mean, everybody condemns the deaths as people queue for aid. But this aid system that was enforced is only possible because of the support of the United States in its delivery. So what is the Foreign Secretary doing to persuade the United States that this is not the way to deliver aid into Gaza?
Well, I want to reassure him that I have made representations to Secretary of State Rubio about my concerns with the aid system, and I've done that alongside many European foreign ministers and members of the G7.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently met with the mother of Oz Daniel, a 19-year-old who was murdered by Hamas on the 7th of October, and his dead body was dragged into Gaza. Oz loved to play music, he loved Guns N' Roses and was a brilliant guitar player. This is about a mum who just wants her dead son's body bringing home. A senior US official has said that Israel is bending over backwards to agree a ceasefire, and it is Hamas that is blocking it. Will the Foreign Secretary set out what pressure the government is applying to Hamas by Qatar and Egypt to agree a ceasefire and to bring the hostages home?
The honourable gentleman is right to the extent that the challenge faced on the ceasefire has been principally that Hamas do not want to pause, and the Israeli government has said that they do want to pause. There's also been discussion of what withdrawal we would see of the IDF within Israel, and of course changing the humanitarian aid system. That is why a ceasefire has remained stuck, but it is my hope that once the Knesset rises on the 22nd, we will move to a ceasefire.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the Foreign Secretary follows the diplomatic path, will he ensure that in the discussions of the two-state solution, it is borne in mind that not only does the state of Palestine exist in that two-state solution, but also Israel's neighbours do need to recognise Israel's right to exist?
Yes, I will.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Najwa Ahmed Fati Radwan and Mohammed Hassan Yusuf Dawood are just two of the tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have been killed in Gaza. Many of their names were read out over the course of 12 hours at a really powerful vigil that I joined in Aylesbury Town Centre this weekend. Yet today that list of dead children has likely just got longer with Israel's assault on Deir al-Balah. Will the Foreign Secretary say to his Israeli counterparts, enough is enough?
Can I reassure my honourable friend that I said that this morning? to my Israeli foreign counterpart.
And before I call the next speaker, I heard some unacceptable comments directed at a member in this chamber, and I will not be having that. So until I find out from the clerks who said those words, we are investigating it. So please do be assured that I will investigate it. Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary at the beginning of his remarks mentioned the savagery that's unfolding in southern Syria and said that he'd spoken to his Syrian interlocutor, Minister Shabani, about it. Has he spoken to Tel Aviv about it, since the only country that has visibly come to the assistance of the Druze for all the criticism that has been rightly aimed at it is Israel? And if he has, can he say what his assessment is of the wisdom or otherwise of the action that Israel has taken?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the UK is clear that we expect Israel to adhere to their commitment that their presence in the area of separation in the south is both limited and temporary, and that I did press the foreign minister, the Israeli foreign minister, on their activity, which I worry destabilises the situation further.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I recognise the Foreign Secretary's labours to get as many international allies on board, and I recognise the importance of that. But clearly we must do more. This is not enough. Given Israel's flaunting of international law and the devastating consequences of that, including, I understand, that Israeli soldiers are reporting being told to kill children, to point and shoot. It's completely unacceptable. So as a starting point, perhaps we could ensure that we are refusing entry to the Israeli Air Force Chief to visit the Royal International Air Tattoo, as well as others having said, how are we going to get children who need care over here?
Well, I said that I will look at the issue of what more we can do should children require medical aid in our own country. If what she has said is correct, then that would constitute a war crime, very clearly. We cannot have soldiers turning their guns on children, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on any decision that might come to me.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I hosted Keith and Aviva Siegel, both of whom were hostages and were released. The previous week I met families of hostages who all pleaded with all of us to get the hostages released. They've now been in captivity for 654 days without any access from the International Red Cross. So will the Foreign Secretary call out Hamas to enable the International Red Cross to go and see those hostages and to make sure they're being treated humanely?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right, and I did say in my statement that Hamas are making hay with the chaos that exists on the ground, and it is quite wrong to restrict the support of organisations like the Red Cross and the Red Crescent.
Andy Slaughter.
Andy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister responded to my questions on Gaza in Liaison Committee this afternoon by saying, we need a ceasefire and we need it straight away. The situation on the ground is intolerable. How will we get that ceasefire when the Israeli government has already rejected the statement by Foreign Secretary and his allied ministers as disconnected from reality? The will of the House is clear on this matter, that it wants action, not words. Yes. Why is he not hearing that?
Hear.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and I thank him for his long-standing campaigning on these issues, of course I'm hearing the strength of feeling in the House. How could you not? And of course, the Israeli government can see the strength of feeling in the House. He knows the list of actions that the UK has taken. He knows the work that we're doing with close allies. He knows too that we have not brought this war to an end. And he will be familiar with the work that we're doing with countries like Qatar and Egypt and the United States to bring about a ceasefire.
Alison Bennett. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday it was reported, as honourable members will be aware, that at least 93 Palestinians were shot and killed whilst queuing for GHF distributed food because they and their families are being starved to death. The fact that GHF stands for Gaza Humanitarian Foundation smacks of an Orwellian doublespeak which I find profoundly disturbing. The Foreign Secretary must surely agree that the current system of aid distribution, headed by the GHF, is both unsafe and grossly inadequate. Is the Secretary of State content that Britain is doing all it can to ensure it is not complicit in the grotesque use of starvation as a tool of war?
Well, I'd want to associate my remarks with what the Honourable Lady has said and to ensure her, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of everyone in this chamber, there will be no complicity of any of us in acts where there could be a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I heard from Keith and Aviva Siegel. They had been held hostage by Hamas, and there was a powerful reminder from them that until all hostages are released, no hostage is released. That's true for Avinatan Or and for his family. It's true for Gali and Zeev Berman and for their family too. And in fact, it's the families of hostages who are some of the loudest voices calling for an end to this war. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps he is taking to ensure that the next ceasefire is permanent, seeing hostages get out of Gaza and aid get in?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and he's absolutely right to mention the hostages that he does, and he knows that I meet regularly with hostage families and did a few weeks ago in my office, and he's absolutely right that the overwhelming majority of the Israeli people, 83%, want a ceasefire so the hostages can get out, and they want it to be a sustained and enduring ceasefire, which is not currently the position of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Carly Danier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women has said that Palestinian mothers are repeatedly watching their children slowly starve to death, be maimed, be killed and be buried alive, and that this is deliberate, part of Israel's strategy to physically and psychologically destroy women and the continuity of the Palestinian people. She called this a femi-genocide. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has repeatedly said the situation is intolerable. Yet by failing to pull every single lever that this government could, it is tolerating it. So when will he stand on the right side of history and implement a full arms embargo, widespread sanctions, a ban on the import of settlement goods and funding evidence collection for prosecutions?
Well, can I say, to Honourable Lady, I stand by all the decisions that we've made as a government. I listed them and they're numerous in my statement. And I just say that on the full arms embargo, I am content that we're not sending arms that could be used in Gaza. I ask her to look closely at the export licensing regime because there are many things that are sent to Israel and actually they go and they're for use by NGOs in Israel. Sometimes it's so that they themselves are not injured in theatres of conflict.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If not starved and emaciated children, doctors have told us that they walk into the emergency room and see little tiny bodies strewn across the floor with burns, blasts and bullets. Their job is to choose which child to save and which ones they will have to let go. That is decision making. And the Foreign Secretary has an option right before him to make a decision which could make a difference to those children. One, to protect all health facilities and the means to do that at the UN, and I trust that he will. But secondly, if he doesn't recognise the state of Palestine, there will be no state left to recognise.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the vision that she paints, and I'd want to associate myself with the remarks that she makes in relation to children, and particularly in starvation and the situation that they face. And of course, we are working closely with the UN system. I spoke to Tom Fletcher at the beginning of last week to get the latest on the aid situation, and we will continue to work with them.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Foreign Secretary states that he believes in a two-state solution, as I have done since at least the 1973 Yom Kippur War, but that Hamas mustn't be a part of it. Does he agree with me that the best chance there ever was for the two-state solution was when Israel withdrew in 2005 from the Gaza Strip, but Hamas was then elected in January 2006 and has been in power there ever since and is still managing to hang on? So does he accept that if ever the government did recognise a Palestinian state, it would have to be the West Bank without the Gaza Strip, given the internecine slaughter between Hamas on the one hand and the PLO on the other, which followed the last withdrawal?
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman that Hamas cannot continue to govern in Gaza, and I suspect that everyone in this chamber agrees with that. I do believe that there are prospects beyond that. Indeed, when the IRA laid down their arms, that's a template for how you can demilitarise and how leaders, perhaps in this circumstance, can exit Gaza. But I do say to him that the continued undermining of the Palestinian Authority by the Israeli government, including the starvation now of their funds, is also trying an attempt to not get to that two-state solution, which all of us in this House want to see.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Foreign Secretary, we watch families surveying the ruins of their homes being mocked by illegal settlers in the West Bank. A little boy looking at his dead relative, waiting for him to take another breath. I watched a mother whose baby had its leg amputated before it even got to take its first step. Where is our humanity? And I asked the Foreign Secretary, to have a two-state solution, we need two states. Let's just recognise Palestine. Or tell me what the words I need to say to the Foreign Secretary to get our government to make real, meaningful action. Tell me what to say and I'll say it.
Well, I'd say to my honourable friend that we do need humanity, and everything that this government has done has been to ensure that there is that humanity and to ensure the dignity of the Palestinian people and the hostages that are still underground. We will continue everything that we have. We'll throw everything at it to get that ceasefire. That is what we're doing. I sense her frustration, and many in the chamber. I'm as frustrated as she is, but it's not frustration alone will not deliver what we want to see.
Manuela Pertegala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the Israeli government should bear heavy consequences should it decide to proceed with the approval of the illegal E1 settlement plan in occupied East Jerusalem, which will threaten the two-state solution?
Well, the last government, back in 2014, suggested there would be consequences if they move forward with E1. And so it's absolutely the case that there would be, not just from the UK, but from all international partners, if they made such a move.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our constituents are watching children being starved and shot in front of our eyes. They are watching illegal settlers systematically and strategically undermining the Palestinian state. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a risk of international humanitarian law being broken. It is international humanitarian law being broken in front of our eyes on an hourly and on a daily basis. So our constituents are asking,
what this government is doing to stop it, and they are asking that because it is unbearable. They can see that the current approach is not working. We were promised more action weeks ago, and today we are not seeing more action. So can I ask my right honourable friend, what is the government doing to secure accountability under international law, and when will the government recognise the State of Palestine?
Well, can I remind my honourable friend and thank her for the strength of her feeling and her campaigning and championing of this issue in her constituency. But can I remind her that we are supporting many groups that are on the ground in the West Bank, documenting expansion, documenting violence. That work assists the United Nations and it assists the global community.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a narrative around aid, and we all want to see aid reach the innocent in Gaza, that Israel is blocking it. But over recent months, Israel has facilitated nearly 2 million tonnes of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And as of this morning, there were 700 trucks of aid that have passed from Israel and are sitting in Gaza undelivered. So will the Foreign Secretary agree with me that aid is getting through, and what needs to get better is the delivery?
I'm afraid I can't agree with that statement, and I don't recognise the numbers.
Marcus Campbell-Serviers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I understand it, Hamas want Egypt and Qatar, and also the United States, empowered as legal guarantors, not only for a 60-day truce, but also up to a signatory date of any final agreement with Israel. Can't America be prevailed upon to act as a guarantor beyond the final settlement? Hamas could be forced to reconsider its objectives under pressure from a population desperately looking for long-term security.
Well, I can say to my honourable friend that we're working particularly with Arab partners on this issue. Hamas have got to exit. They've got to step away from the governance of Gaza. But he is right. We cannot have a pause for 60 days. We need an enduring, permanent ceasefire.
Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza are being deliberately starved to death. Aid convoys are coming under fire. Children are being shot by soldiers, and schools and hospitals are being bombed. Could the Foreign Secretary outline what further war crimes need to be taken place until the UK government will sanction the Israeli government and sanction Prime Minister Netanyahu himself?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that he would struggle to point to any government of a major G7 or European state that has done as much as we have in office. We led the sanctioning of Smodrik and Ben-Gvir specifically because of their language and their behaviours in relation to the West Bank. And of course we have said that we keep sanctions under review, as he would expect.
Dame Chianwara.
I welcome the Secretary of State's statement with world leaders urging Israel to agree to a ceasefire in humanitarian aid. But I say to my right honourable friend, who as I know entirely sincere, that we have heard in this chamber, and indeed the British people have heard, urgings and demands and outrage, and yet the situation only gets worse, with more and more Palestinians dying, each life of incalculable value. In my adjournment debate in April, I asked what more we could do to help the Palestinian people. And when the Minister responded to me last week, he clarified, he made some useful clarifications, including that Israeli settlement goods should be labelled so British people can decide what they are spending their money on. But when it comes to the actions of the UK government, I have to ask my right honourable friend, is this it?
Well, in some senses, that is in the hands currently of those who continue to prosecute this conflict. But when she says that each life is of incalculable value, she is absolutely right. I have made more statements on this subject than any other minister has made statements in this House over the last year. And of course, my colleague, the Minister for the Middle East, has also made his lion's share of statements. The strength of feeling is well known, and I think it's reflected not just here, but across the globe. And Israel and the current course of the government is bringing the country into ill repute. That's what's happening.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week in Bogota, the Hague Group of Nations met, led by South Africa. Those nations pledged to support the ICC, to support the ICJ, to refuse all arms sales to Israel, to refuse the facilitation of arms to Israel, to refuse anything that enhances the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. In short, global opinion supporting the Palestinian people. Will the British government also sign the Hague Declaration and support those group of nations determined to bring the world's attention to this, to end the genocide that's going on and the occupation that continues?
Well, I will speak to my South African counterpart about that issue, but can I say to him, we here in the UK support the ICC, and indeed it receives funding from British taxpayers and the ICJ. We also stand against what we are seeing in the West Bank and what we are seeing in Gaza. So much of what he has said, I would also say, is consistent with UK policy.
Jessica Marden.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. On Friday, the UN reported that 800 people had been killed near aid sites in Gaza over the last 6 weeks, and yet again on the weekend 100 people died just seeking food and water. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary again a question he's been asked twice before? He said to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee this month he would take further measures against Israel if there was no ceasefire and the intolerable situation in Gaza continued. What exactly did he mean by that? Constituents will want to know, specifically on trade and on recognition and more, what exactly he meant.
Well, can I say to her that all action is under review at this time, that we are pressing for a ceasefire. Our assessment is that we could see that ceasefire shortly after the Knesset rises, and she'll understand that that is our priority, to get a ceasefire, because it's the single act that would increase or would stop the suffering that we're seeing in Gaza. But of course, and she lists some of the actions that she would expect to be under consideration with international partners, and we must act internationally alongside partners if we're to have any effect.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The disturbing images from Gaza, of course, lead us all to come to the conclusion that this war must end. But we must remember that it was started because terrorists raped, burnt, murdered, took captives and still abuse those captives today. And the war could finish tomorrow if they released those captives and agreed a ceasefire. There's been much said today about Israel trying to starve the people of Palestine. The fact is that since the new arrangements went in place to stop Hamas stealing aid, 82 million meals have been supplied through the new arrangements to Gaza. And I think that our government should be, instead of talking about a two-state solution and talking about recognising a state which doesn't exist, and if it did exist, will be controlled by terrorists, we should be standing by the government which is seeking to have justice for its own citizens.
I can't agree with what the Honourable Gentleman has said, save for his remarks in relation to the hostages who must be released.
Florence Ashimole.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just wanted to gently point out to the Foreign Secretary the reason there are so many of us in here is because we have been waiting a long time for this. The situation unfolding, as many colleagues have said, our constituents continue to write to us. Last week, Save the Children held a photo exhibition in Parliament in partnership with Choose Love and the photographer Mason Merriman. I should declare that he's the chair of the South Bank Centre, which is in my constituency. I just wanted to read a clip from one of those pictures. It said, "If you had a superpower, what would it be and why?" And it read from the young girl, "The ability to change events in order to help my country to become free and to help children live in a safer environment like the rest of the children in the world." If we are seeing children being killed for getting vital food and aid, we must ask ourselves, what more can we be doing? If we are seeing children being manipulated at malnutrition, if we are seeing children starving, Foreign Secretary, I ask, where is the real action from this government to stop this so that more children can live?
Well, I hear the strength of my honourable friend's conviction and views. When she asks for more action, we are taking action. We have taken action every single day in office. British taxpayers are funding the alleviation of suffering. Is it enough? No. Have we brought this war to an end? We have not brought this war to an end. And I have to tell her the UK will be unable to do that unilaterally. That is why we are working with partners internationally. I have done that every single day in office. Me raising my voice will not bring this war to an end, and I lament that and I regret that. But am I sure the UK government is doing everything in its power? Yes, I am.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 29 arms export controls were suspended in September due to possible break in international law. Yet between September and December, there was a further 34 licences. So can I explain that? Can I ask the Secretary to explain that decision? How many licences have been produced this year? And what's the UK government's red line for a total arms trade embargo?
Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that most licences are not for military use. Most do not go to Israeli authorities. Many are for civilian use, like product testing or body armour for journalists and NGOs. And I'm quite sure he wouldn't want us to not support those organisations. And some are components going to Israeli companies that are then re-exported to third countries, including NATO allies.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is right. We have been waiting weeks for this statement because the truth is our constituents don't understand, and neither do we. They don't understand how we can track our mobile phones being stolen to China or Algeria, but we can't track F-35 components in the multi-million-pound arms trade. They don't understand why we haven't reported Israel directly to the ICC for what's been happening to aid workers. And they don't understand why, when this House voted in 2014 to recognise the state of Palestine, that hasn't been enacted. I hear the frustration of the Foreign Secretary. I don't doubt his frustration with his partners. But we now, here tonight, could say we don't need a conference. We will recognise the state of Palestine. Will he join us, yes or no?
Well, again, I understand the strength of feeling from the Honourable Lady. Can I say to her that she knows that there will be a two-state conference on the 28th of July, and of course we will participate, but she will also have detected that our French and Saudi Arabian colleagues are not talking about recognition at that conference. They're talking about how we get to two states and prolong and get an enduring ceasefire. And it may be, as we head to September and UNGA, that the issue of recognition is raised once more.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2023, the Israel Defence Force has killed a record number of journalists. The Israel Defence Force has killed a record number of humanitarian workers. It continually murders starving children as they queue for aid. An Israeli soldier himself outed his commanders for their illegal orders to arbitrarily kill civilians. Not a sequence of coincidences, but war crime after war crime after war crime, and a clear message to the world: do not intervene, do not observe what we are doing to the Palestinians. The Foreign Secretary said he wants a two-state solution. He can take a giant leap in that direction right now with a one-word answer: does the Foreign Secretary recognise the State of Palestine?
He's heard what I've said in terms of my commitment to two states. He knows that we have not yet got a ceasefire, and he knows that we are working with international partners to ensure that we get an enduring ceasefire. And he knows the debate around recognition, because I've talked about it not just in select committees but at this dispatch box on many occasions.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 17,921 children have been killed in this horrific war in Gaza. The Israeli army willingly opened fire on children collecting food and trying to access water. Children are literally being starved to death. And those children not killed are left with disabling injuries. Now, I agree with the Foreign Secretary, the war in Gaza must end. But we've seen the response from the Israeli Foreign Minister. They are ignoring what this government is saying. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, what will he do now? And is it not time for there to be an end to all arms sales, not just some, all, and a complete ban on all settlement goods? And he says he's going to be part of the conference next month, well, this month on the 28th of July. But what I will say, he doesn't need a conference to recognise the state of Palestine.
I just say to my honourable friend politely that there are countries, not this year but last year, who took a step to recognition. It did not change things on the ground. It did not change things on the ground. So she says with passion what is going on. My focus is what is going on and trying to alleviate the suffering, whilst I recognise the debate on recognition. But I do say to her politely, it is not my assessment, in all honesty, not that of course we must move to recognition at the appropriate point, but I do not believe in terms of this conflict it would change the situation on the ground.
Caroline Burden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every day we are seeing more and more reports of children being killed in cold blood while they queue for food. The horror cannot get any worse. Prime Minister Netanyahu has already rejected the statement signed by 31 countries. It didn't take him long, and it's very clear that he's not interested in stopping this horrific offensive. The time for words is over. This House wants to see actions, widespread sanctions, an end to all arms sales and recognition of Palestine as a state. Netanyahu deserves nothing less, and he might actually take notice if we take action. So will the Foreign Secretary consider doing more taking more action to bring this horrific offensive to an end?
As I've said, yes to that last bit. I want to see a ceasefire in the coming days, but of course we continue to consider what further steps we can take with allies to bring this war to an end, as she would expect.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary accept that Israel's plans to transfer control of the Ibrahimi Mosque from the Palestinian municipality of Hebron is highly inflammatory and a violation of international law? And will the government condemn any transfer of authority away from Palestinians and consider sanctions against the Kiryat Arba settlement municipality if it assumes such a role?
We are concerned at the statements and the language that have been made. We do believe that they're inflammatory. We do believe that they breach Israel's obligations, and we are looking closely at Israel's behaviour if that were to take place.
Ali Chams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Foreign Secretary, words do matter, but actions speak louder. What MPs, members across this House cannot understand, what citizens of this country, our constituents cannot understand, is why he will not take the actions that are available to him to end UK complicity in this horror. A full arms embargo and an end to all military cooperation, a full ban on all settlement goods, sanctions on all those responsible for genocide, recognition of the state of Palestine. Why will he not take these concrete actions now?
Can I reassure the Honourable Lady, the UK government is not complicit in any actions that would breach international humanitarian law. I took that step back in September alongside restoring funding to UNRWA. She asked for a full embargo. She will note that there was a judicial review of that decision. The government's position was upheld because she doesn't want to see us weakened or our allies weakened in terms of other conflicts that exist that have a direct bearing on the safety and security of the people of Britain.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary reiterating this Labour government's total opposition to Israel's military operation. It's raised with me regularly by my constituents and our shared abhorrence at seeing the sight of children being shot at as they're seeking food. The Israeli Defence Minister announced his plans to forcibly transfer all Palestinian civilians in Gaza to a camp in the ruined city of Rafah, which the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has deemed as a concentration camp in all but name. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is completely unacceptable violation of international law which cannot go ignored? And will the government guarantee further action against Israel if it proceeds with this plan?
Yes, yes, yes. She talks about the statements of Ehud Olmert. It's also right to say that Yair Golan, that Yair Lapid, that Benny Gantz, that Ehud Barak, that the former IDF chief have all condemned what Minister Katz has suggested, and I condemn it wholeheartedly.
Shirkat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, as a Minister of the State met with Yair Golan, shaking hands and smiling and taking photographs, a Palestinian mother was faced with a dilemma. Does she stay where she is and see the starvation of her children, or does she venture out and see the children being blown to pieces, adding to the 17,000 other children as a statistic, or 10 children a day whose limbs are blown off? These children do not need these empty words, Secretary of State. It will not stop their bleeding, it will not stop their killing, it will not nourish their bodies, and they won't stop the tears of their mothers. So I agree with the Minister, even recognising the state of Palestine today is not going to make any difference to the children on the ground. So I ask the Minister, will he take a tangible step and propose a British-led, internationally supported hospital in Gaza in partnership with a coalition of the willing to provide some remnants of humanity in this darkest of hours?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that I am proud of, notwithstanding the huge humanitarian catastrophe that's taken place in Gaza, I am proud of the work of UK Med, the funding that we've been able to give them, the extra money I've announced today, and that aid, medical aid, is getting through to relieve some suffering. But he's absolutely right. Can we do more? We will continue to do more. And I want to reassure him that I'm working particularly with my Jordanian counterparts to see what more we can do to alleviate that suffering.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Aid should be a lifeline in humanitarian crises, yet it has become a death trap for Gazans. People are starving, yet one of the only ways they can get food is risking their lives going to an aid distribution point run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So does the Secretary of State agree that we are seeing the militarisation of aid, that we cannot let this set a precedent, and can I press him further on the conversations with both the Israeli government and the US government on bringing the operations of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to an end?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising the issue of aid workers. The widespread loss of life of aid workers is just a travesty. It's unprecedented. And I would remind colleagues of Chapter 2 of the Conduct of Hostilities of the Legal Practitioners on Humanitarian Law, and it says distinctions lie at the heart of international humanitarian law. It requires parties to armed conflict to distinguish at all times between civilians and combatants, and of course that includes aid workers. And it is a travesty what we have seen take place over this last 2.5 years.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I, first of all, thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for his thoughtful use of words in what's a very contentious issue. With the latest reports of the attacks on the Jewish people, where hundreds of Jewish civilians, including women and children, were being kidnapped, tortured, raped, executed, mutilated, with Christians suffering at their side despite the fact that they are fighting back, there is, I believe, a real and valid fear of genocide of those people who have a strong faith and who, as such, are worthy of our protection. What can government and the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary, do to secure peace and hope for these people who are currently being targeted and need aid urgently? Thank you so much.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for naming the Druze and the awful atrocities that they have seen visited on them in the last few days, and the positions of minorities in Syria. I saw the Pope comment unusually in the strongest terms at what he has seen. Can I reassure him that I raised these issues with the Syrian leader myself, that I urged him to act. There must be accountability as he grips the entirety of his countries. Of course, these incidents were also taking place under the Assad regime, and in some ways have been going on for much time. But it is totally unacceptable, the suffering that is being wrought on minorities in Syria at this time.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The situation facing Gazans is truly catastrophic, and we must secure a ceasefire as soon as possible, with all hostages being freed and unhindered access to aid. Now, our experience in Northern Ireland shows that to build a long-term sustainable peace, we need to invest in civil society and peace builders to create a consensus and to change opinions for the better. Will, therefore, my right honourable friend tell us what this UK government is doing to support the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace?
Well, can I reassure my honourable friend that we are, British taxpayers are funding NGOs that work across communities. We're supporting that work on the West Bank, we're supporting that work on Gaza, we're supporting accountability because that is number one when we look at some of the injustice that is being wrought, and we will continue to do that work, including the International Humanitarian Fund.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are no red lines. Every single allegation made by the Israeli government of the crimes committed by Hamas have been reacted or reenacted and executed. For example, killing of innocent people, beheading of babies, burning of babies alive, rape, hostage taking, including many hundreds of doctors. And now we are actually seeing children being shot in the genitals. There are games being played by the IDF. There are no red lines. Will the Foreign Secretary say from that dispatch box, please, what are the red lines? What will cause this government to take proactive steps?
What the honourable gentleman mentions fall into that category of the assessment that I made back in September of last year, that there was a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law. And it was on that legal advice and the quasi-legal position that I took that I made sure that nothing we did in this country could be complicit in such action. I'd want to give him that reassurance. He paints a vivid picture that's unimaginable, that the suffering has gone on for as long as it has.
Alex Baker.
The suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached horrific levels. Israel's aid delivery model has failed to meet humanitarian needs. As a mother, I can't bear to watch children being murdered. My constituents can't bear to watch. I welcome the statement today, but what is the government doing to deliver the 3 actions that my constituents want to see this government deliver? A UN-led ceasefire, the release of hostages, and a credible pathway to a 2-state solution.
Well, I'm very grateful for my honourable friend mentioning all 3 of those things. We are working for a ceasefire. It's my assessment that we probably won't get one now before the Knesset rises. We are absolutely working to get those hostages out, and I've called to mind opinion in Israel that wants to see a ceasefire to get those hostages out, reminded the Israeli government of that, and I did that again when I spoke to the minister. The aid situation is abominable. That there are trucks waiting at the border is totally reprehensible. And as I say, I'm guided by the practitioner's handbook on breaches of international humanitarian law, war crimes, the duty of care, proportionality and distinction, particularly in theatres of conflict. And I am deeply troubled that these seem to be being breached.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this Foreign Secretary's announcement of additional aid to help the people of Gaza. But this is aid that will join the millions of dollars and thousands of trucks of aid that is stood outside the border, not being allowed in to Gaza. There are 1 million children in Gaza starving to death. Palestinian children are our children. We must do everything in our power to get food to them. 85% of the population is facing a level 5 of the starvation assessment. So what steps, please, what steps will the UK government and the Foreign Secretary take to feed our children in Palestine?
I'm very grateful to the way in which the honourable gentleman has put his remarks. And he knows that in the occupied territories, Israel controls who gets in and who gets out. He knows that the last time we saw a ceasefire, we saw a rapid escalation of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. That is far from the situation today. We were able, working with the UN system, to get some WPF trucks in, an increase over the last few weeks. And our EU colleagues have been doing a considerable amount also with the Israeli government to increase the amount of trucks. But is it sufficient? No, it is not. And therefore we remain deeply worried about malnourished children, notwithstanding the statements that have been made in this chamber about children whose life has been taken away from them as they've waited for aid because of the system that's been put in place.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation in Gaza, as the honourable gentleman before me touched on, is all the more infuriating when we hear that the UN has 3 months' worth of food waiting in warehouses on the border, while it's reported that 19 people died of starvation just in the last 24 hours. I'm grateful for all the Foreign Secretary has done so far on this issue, and I know that he agrees with me that the war must end now. But what are the next actions that we need to do to make that a reality?
We have to bring about that ceasefire, and we have to do all we can to alleviate the suffering, and that's what I set out in my statement today. But I remain as frustrated as she is that this war is not over.
Sabir Ahmed.
He's been kind enough to meet me a number of times over this year, so he knows the feelings of my constituents of Glasgow South West well over this conflict. They're concerned and they're disgusted at the sight of the mass killings and starvation of the Gazan people. But they're also frustrated at the lack of medical care and humanitarian aid. The Foreign Secretary knows I have many surgical colleagues working in Gaza and who have worked in Gaza, including Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, who alongside the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the Australian government desperately are seeking to get a maternity hospital caring for women and children into Gaza. Will the Foreign Secretary lend his support and the support of his office to this endeavour?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I'm grateful for all the work that the honourable member has done, and his background in medicine helps, of course, bring these issues to public attention.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. According to the UN, nearly 800 Palestinians have been killed near the GHF aid points. And despite the UK sending £129 million in aid, this is nearly pointless, as the denial of the UN's aid system and Israel's cruel and blockade is choking off supplies for people who need it and looks very much like starvation as a weapon of war. Yeah. The RAF broke a previous blockade with airdrops months ago, and while we welcome the additional medical aid that has been promised today of 40 million and today's international statement, Israel has rejected such appeals. So I ask again, please, what are the additional steps that he told the Foreign Affairs Committee that we will take to break this cruel blockade and get aid to those desperately in need?
Well, my honourable friend will have heard the statement that I've made today and the extra steps that we are taking in terms of humanitarian aid, and he will have seen the statement alongside 31 international partners on the fact that this war must come to an end and that aid must get in. And he's right to condemn the aid system. We warned Israel about reducing the aid points to 4. And now we're seeing the horrors in front of our eyes. And I remind them again about their obligations to international humanitarian law and my worry that they are being breached.
Rupert Hook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We rightly refunded UNRWA, but since then, aid has become a daily death trap and starvation widespread. Our calls for a ceasefire only saw the last one get broken, and now, as he pointed out, the chilling order to forcibly displace an entire population of 2 million people, condemned by ex-Israeli PN Ehud Barak. What more concrete are we doing to stop the man-made destruction of Gaza, 35 hospitals, hostages, soldiers and civilians before our very eyes? Because history will not judge this well, and words are not working.
Well, can I say we stand with the international community in all of our efforts, and in terms of what comes next, we support the Arab plan. We're working with Arab partners to improve that plan and to get to a day after, which we can get to if we get that ceasefire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Gaza's facing a catastrophic famine-like conditions and people are dying in appalling circumstances. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is fundamentally failing to properly distribute adequate humanitarian aid and is turning distribution into another front line in Gaza. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, what actions is he taking to ensure that UN NGOs can get into Gaza and deliver humanitarian aid that Gazans desperately need?
Well, can I reassure my honourable friend that I spoke to the UN about this last week. We're working with the UN, and I was pleased that they saw the World Food Programme able to get some extra trucks in. We will continue to work closely with them. We believe that they must be a fundamental part of a system that distributes aid to the people of Gaza.
Pamela Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank my right honourable friend for his statement this afternoon, and I note the agreement reached with the 30 other nations. However, as we know, Israel has already rejected it. It seems to me that Israel is becoming more and more emboldened by the lack of concrete action by the international community. And while people starve or are killed while they're queuing for food, while those sheltering in the Caritas Jerusalem shelter were bombed at the weekend, it really does begin to look as though there is genocide unfolding before our eyes. I realise the Foreign Secretary will want to take a legalistic view of that, but to those of us looking at it from a moral and a logical point of view, there can be no other words for it. And while I understand and I agree with the Foreign Secretary that recognising the state of Palestine will not bring this to an end, it would at least give the people of Palestine something to cling on to and some hope. So can we please not discount the opportunities to raise that issue and to advocate for that issue and to declare that we regard Palestine as a state?
Can I reassure the Honourable Lady. And the Honourable Lady is in my experience, uses her words carefully. And the whole House will have heard what she said this afternoon. But can I reassure her that in my discussions with the Jordanians, with the Saudi Arabians, with the Qataris, with the Emiratis, with the Egyptians, and indeed with Prime Minister Mustafa, of course we discuss the recognition issue, as we have been doing with our French colleagues.
Jazafrov.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Israeli government's denial of aid to civilians is turning an entire population of Palestinians to just skin and bones, starving them to death. As kids die, the Israeli government is pushing ahead in defiance with their humanitarian plan for Gaza. A plan that has been described as a concentration camp by the former Israeli Prime Minister. Can I press the Foreign Secretary to enforce further sanctions, and can he lay out what tangible pressure the government is putting on Israel to stop using hunger as a weapon of war?
Well, can I reassure the Honourable Gentleman that, as he would expect, I raise these issues with Israel on a regular basis, and I raised that issue with Israel this morning.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Inhumanity is a red line drawn by international law, underwritten by universal human rights. In Gaza, that red line has not just been broken, it has been ignored, it has been betrayed, it has been erased. Foreign Secretary tells us Netanyahu is not listening. In fact, he's putting his middle finger up to the UK government. Will the Foreign Secretary send military personnel to protect Palestinians from the genocide that is being committed by the IDF?
Well, I recognise the strength of feeling that the Honourable Member is conveying to this chamber. I listed all the things that we are doing, and I think the most important thing that the UK government can do is press to get that ceasefire and press to get an alleviation of suffering, and of course to do everything we can to see the hostages return.
John McDonnell.
I just want to be clear the government's legal position, if I can. On the 11th of June last year, the government reported that it saw no serious risk of genocide in Gaza. All this time on, and the statements that this Foreign Secretary has made, can I be clear? Is he saying tonight that the government accepts there's a plausible risk of genocide? If he isn't, can he instruct his officials to undertake an immediate review and report to members as rapidly as possible? Because this does, therefore, if it is a plausible risk of genocide, it places legal duties upon the government and all of us, I believe, to act accordingly. And one of the things that could be done, as we've seen in the past when we've had rogue states like South Africa, etc., is the best form of bringing them to heel is financial sanctions. And if he met the financial houses in this country and the banks, and they denied credit lines to Israeli banks, I believe that would be probably the most effective thing that we could do to bring the Israeli government to its senses.
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I'd refer him to the statement I made back in September and the addendum to that statement, which set out the basis on which I had judged that there was a clear risk of international humanitarian law. He knows the long-standing position that it is for the international courts to make any determination of genocide. Our assessment is that there is a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law.
Cat Eccles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Order. Cat Eccles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. People of Gaza are being starved to death despite UNRWA having enough supplies to feed the population for 3 months. It is not a matter of logistics, it is sheer cruelty. GHF ration centres are purposely located in the south in militarised zones with sporadic opening hours and sudden closures, leaving people with no option but to make that long journey on foot and wait many hours on the off chance that supplies may become available or they may be killed while trying.
This is not just a genocide, it is now ethnic cleansing. But when Israel's government is ignoring calls from 31 countries, what further action can we take?
Well, as the Honourable Lady has heard, of course what we're seeing is inhumane, it's deadly, and it's depriving Gazans of human dignity. And of course, as she would expect, the government, working with its partners, keeps everything under further consideration.
And the final question, Jeevan Sander.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We see the brutality and bloodshed in Gaza every single night on our screens. It's disproportionate, it's horrific, and it's gone on for far too long. Bombs, bullets, and now, of course, the blockades as well. And there can never be any justification, no justification for shooting people whilst they're waiting and queuing for aid. I know the Secretary of State shares my desire for peace, a two-state solution, an immediate ceasefire and the flowing of aid into Gaza. Can the Secretary of State share what he is doing to help achieve that?
Well, he's right. There can be no justification for shooting people as they are queuing for food. None whatsoever. And can I reassure him that we continue to work with the UN system and we continue to work with close partners like Jordan to do all we can to alleviate the suffering.
That concludes the statement, and if I can just give the front benches a few moments to swap over. Statement, Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Infected Blood Inquiry's additional report was published on 9th of July, and today I'd like to provide the House with an initial response. I'm grateful to Sir Brian Langstaff for seeking justice for victims and for the inquiry's constructive additional report. His ambition was to ensure that fair compensation is provided to every person that is eligible without delay, and that resonates across the country. Before considering the detail of the report, I want to share the latest delivery figures from the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. As of the 15th of July, IBCA has contacted 2,215 people to begin their claim, with 1,934 having started the claim process. 808 offers have been made, with a total value of over 602 million. 587 people have accepted their offer, with over £411 million paid in compensation, meaning approximately 60% of infected people registered with a support scheme have been contacted to begin their claim. I'm pleased that progress is being made, but I acknowledge the calls from the community for faster payment. That is why the Government wrote to the Public Accounts and the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committees last month, outlining the steps we are taking to remove administrative barriers to IBCA speeding up payments. I'm also pleased to announce, Madam Deputy Speaker, further interim payments of £210,000 to the estates of infected people who are registered to an infected blood support scheme and have sadly passed away. This is in addition to the over 500 interim payments already paid, and I will provide further information on this as soon as I am able to. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is committed to providing fair compensation to victims of the infected blood scandal. And in the autumn budget, we have set aside £11.8 billion to do that. The inquiry has recognised the Government's commitment, saying there can be no doubt that the Government has done right in ways which powerfully signal its intent. However, I agree with Sir Brian's statement that there is still more to be done to ensure that the detail and operation of the scheme matches up to its intent. Sir Brian has made a number of recommendations on ways the compensation scheme could be amended to achieve a scheme which works for everyone. We will publish an update on gov.uk today, setting out the Government's approach to the inquiry's further recommendation. I will deposit a copy of that update in the House libraries. We will also provide a comprehensive response to all the recommendations in due course. The report includes several recommendations for IBCA on speed and transparency. I want to first reiterate that the government still expects IBCA to contact all registered infected people to begin a claim and open the service for affected people by the end of this year. And the announcements I'm about to make do not change that position. Now, on Friday, Sir Robert Francis and David Foley confirmed they will be accepting the recommendations the inquiry made to IBCA, and they have committed to working with the community to develop plans for designing and implementing those recommendations. IBCA will design and introduce a process for registration. They will also update their sequencing in line with the inquiry's recommendation, noting this will inform the order in which they open up to cohorts this year. IBCA will introduce a process for prioritisation, recognising that community involvement is needed in tackling any uncertainty which this may introduce. Alongside this, I have asked for a review of IBCA's delivery of the scheme to ensure that it is progressing as quickly as possible. This will be supported by the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, NISTA, and led by an independent reviewer, and I expect the review to begin in August. Now, the inquiry has made recommendations across 9 key areas to ensure that infected and affected people feel that they have overall been compensated fairly by a scheme that is designed and delivered with their input. Separate to the delivery of compensation by IBCA, the inquiry has made recommendations relating to the design and structure of the scheme. 7 of these sub-recommendations the government will accept and implement as soon as we can, so that IBCA can get on with paying compensation. Others will require engagement with the community before the changes are made, in line with the spirit of the inquiry's report. Now, when I gave evidence to the inquiry in May, I said I would take a constructive approach and I would look at the issues which had been put to me. The inquiry has made 8 sub-recommendations in these areas, and I'm pleased to confirm to the House that I'm either accepting these or agreeing with the inquiry that the community should be consulted on next steps. So I can confirm we will remove the 1982 start date for HIV infection to ensure anyone infected due to infected blood or infected blood products with HIV is eligible for the scheme regardless of the infection date. We accept the inquiry's recommendation on affected estates. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm actually going to go further than the inquiry's recommendation. The inquiry recommended that where someone who would be an eligible affected person sadly died or dies between the 21st of May 2024 and 31st of December 2029, their claim will not die with them but becomes part of the estate. I'm actually going to extend that by a further 2 years to the 31st of December 2031. The special category mechanism I know has been a concern for members of the community and this House. Again, I promised the House previously I would look at this, and I'm pleased to say we accept